Hello. On today's episode of Repeatable Genius, I'm recording from my basement, which is in my house just north of Toronto, where the temperature is approaching minus 20 degrees Celsius. That is a bit of a shock to the system because I just returned from a vacation last week in Florida, Orlando, where it was quite a bit warmer. One of the things I noticed when I was in Florida at the resort, and this tells you a little bit more than you need to know about me, is the way the toilets flushed. So the working title of this video is Tim Goes All the Way to Florida and Notices the Toilets. The toilets in these units use something called flush assist, which I'd never encountered until I came to Florida. I did a little research and it turns out that they are prevalent elsewhere, but I'd never seen it in Canada and I wanted a chance to show it to you here. The mechanism inside, when I took the lid off the tank, was something I had never seen before, called flush assist. Flush assist is a pressure vessel that sits inside the porcelain tank of a toilet. That pressure vessel, as it fills up with water, the air inside the pressure vessel is compressed and becomes like a spring. That way, when you flush the toilet, not only do you have the weight of the water pushing the water down, but you also have that pressure of the air above the water, which accelerates the water. This has the effect of flushing quite quickly, and it cleans the bowl better, and it also sends the effluent farther down the drain, up to 3 times as far as a regular flush. So as a quick demo, I'm going to flush this toilet, and you'll notice that it's pretty vigorous. Here we go. Listen to this. 2 seconds and it's flushed completely. So I thought that was a really cool find. I hadn't encountered it before. It's not unique to Florida, but it's something I hadn't seen in person. It has a few advantages. One is, of course, again, that it clears the bowl better. It also prevents condensation because it's a tank within a tank. So there's that air gap between the porcelain and what could be humid, warm air, especially in Florida, on the outside of the tank. So every time the tank fills, that's cold, fresh water, and cold water sitting against the tank and humid air sitting on the other side of the tank would cause condensation. So this air gap is a great way to prevent that. The other advantage of having this pressure vessel inside the tank is that it obviously occupies less volume than the tank itself. Looking at the specs on the toilet that I saw, it said that the tank was 1.4 gallons per flush. The flush assist within the porcelain tank, that tank that fit inside, was only 1 gallon per flush. So that's 40% less water every time you flush. And on top of that, you're probably going to flush less often because it does a better job of clearing the bowl. The other thing is, and this is a bit debatable, I personally, when I first encountered this, thought, well, I would have a lot more faith in that plastic pressure vessel. If I was away on vacation, you could have a porcelain tank rupture, crack, and then you'd be running water until you got home from your vacation and your house could be ruined. A plastic tank, to me, seems more reliable. In fact, that's a bit of a dubious assumption because I've since read that there have been instances where these pressure vessels actually explode. And as a result, you get flying bits of porcelain shrapnel everywhere, and people have been injured by that. There's been a class action suit, and there's been a recall. So I don't think this necessarily is damning to the concept itself. I think that, there ought to be some sort of pressure release valve within the tank, within the flush assist tank, to avoid that kind of thing. And furthermore, it may well be that the system was being used in areas, particularly commercial buildings, where the water pressure is significantly higher than in municipal use. So that may have contributed to these pressure vessels rupturing. The title of my blog is Repeatable Genius. The idea is that there are ways we can use over and over again to systemize arriving at an innovative and useful conclusion, creating a new product or a new service. The other interpretation of repeatable genius is that when you see something out there that you think, oh, that's genius, I wouldn't have thought of that myself, you can think to yourself, well, what other areas could that innovation be applied? And that is why I find these things exciting when I discover them. The principles involved in constructing the flush assist do have parallels with other innovations out there. When examining something like the flush assist and looking for ideas elsewhere, it's helpful to generalize what's at play here. This pressure vessel is basically a hydraulic accumulator. These are used on almost any hydraulic system, tractors, that kind of thing, as a way to regulate the pressure inside the hydraulic system. And all it is a way of having the fluid, which is incompressible, press up against a gas usually, which is compressible. So if we break down the problem of flushing a toilet rapidly into its basic elements, what we have is water coming in at relatively high pressure. And the way a standard toilet works is it waits until the water fills up, but it doesn't make any effort to trap the pressure of the water coming in. This system, like a hydraulic accumulator, stores that pressure and then uses it later on to clear the bowl. Another example of where a hydraulic accumulator is used in the home and in plumbing is in the water hammer arrestor. When you turn off a faucet quickly, the water that was rushing through that faucet has to stop suddenly. And that can cause a shock, that can cause the pipes to vibrate, and that can be damaging. It can cause a fitting to rupture, and it can just be annoying. If you've ever lived in a house that had that problem, the simplest way to avoid that is to add an empty pipe, which is closed at the top. And that empty pipe will have a column of air in it, and you put that adjacent to the valve that gets shut off. And so when the water comes rushing in and suddenly stops, it has somewhere to go. It has that column of air that can act as a cushion, and it basically just stops the sudden thud. What is exciting about that is that although it's a novel application, the flush assist is not really new technology. It's simply a new application of existing technologies that you can find examples of elsewhere. That's one of the things we're after when we look at repeatable genius. In one sense, repeatable genius is about how do we construct our own process or our team's process to arrive at a useful innovation over and over. But on the other hand, it's a way of saying, if I see something interesting in the world, something clever in the world, is there a way to reapply the technologies or the approaches embodied in that product or service to another product or service? There's another principle at play here in the flush assist, and that is what's called nested doll, having something fit within something else. There are two advantages I can think of having the flush assist fit within the porcelain tank. One is it simply looks better. The porcelain tank matches the bowl. This flush assist fits inside. It doesn't change the look, the appearance of the toilet. The other is, as I talked about earlier, it introduces that air gap between the porcelain and the actual cold water coming into the tank, and so it avoids condensation. This is actually something you see in other situations as well. The thermos, even there are now drinking glasses that are not simply one wall. They have a double wall construction, so there's an air gap between your hand grasping the drink and the cold drink within, and so you have some insulation value there as well. So that's another principle that you could look at. Rather than, at first blush, you might think, I have to replace the entire tank to accomplish the goal of having a better flush, but in fact they were able to fit it within. So when you're looking at a problem you have, is there something you can fit within rather than replacing the whole thing? There's another principle here too, and that's called blessing in disguise. The water coming into the toilet tank or any fitting in your house is coming in at quite high pressure. And that pressure is a source of concern. If the pressure is not effectively contained, you can have leaks all over the house. It can also cause water hammers, we talked about earlier. But in this case, they're taking something that could be a problem and making it into an advantage. By using that to charge, to compress the spring, you're actually taking advantage of something that might otherwise be a problem. Another example of blessing in disguise is the turbocharged motor. The heat within an engine is a serious problem. A car engine is a serious problem. It can destroy the parts in your engine. It can cause a fire underneath the vehicle. A lot of effort is put in to take the exhaust from the engine and safely discharge it from the back of the car. And yet that same heat is a source of energy. That energy can be applied to compressing the fresh air that comes into your engine, giving you more power and more efficiency. So this is another example of turning a potential problem into a blessing. Another example of this principle of blessing in disguise I've encountered recently is a mining company that converted all of its trucks, or many of its trucks, to electric drive. And what's happening here is that they drive an empty truck up to the top of the mountain, gather material from their quarry, and then have it come down the mountain. Now, a typical diesel-powered truck would be burning out its brakes all the way down, or it would be running in very low gear and using the engine to brake, but that wrecks your engine. So what they've done instead is they've taken the truck, which is very heavily laden at the top of the mountain, and because it's an electric vehicle, the electricity, the regeneration actually charges the battery on the way down, and it's sufficiently charged so that when it's unladen, it can go all the way back up the mountain without using any new energy at all. This is another great example of blessing in disguise. For more examples of the principles that can be applied for repeatable genius, please go to the show notes of this video. I will put a link there. It will take you to my website, and I will go into more detail on each one of them. Thank you for watching.